In this video, I'll be discussing why inflation is bad for both businesses and the government, and how it can affect Australia's growth as a whole. So the main reason that businesses suffer in Australia is because our exporters become less competitive. So because our prices have increased, our exporters find it hard to sell their products, and that can lead to increased unemployment. It can lead to reduced jobs in Australia, because essentially overseas countries aren't buying as many of our products because they're too expensive. It can also lead to import competing businesses suffering. So if I'm running, for example, a car company in Australia and I'm trying to compete against cheap imported cars, I might suffer as well, because the imports will be cheaper, and therefore I might lose my job or go out of business, or there might be less demand by Australians for Australian cars. So exporters suffer and import competing businesses suffer because we can't compete with cheaper foreign products. It is important to note, though, that businesses which import goods and services from low inflation countries may find their sales as strong. So, for example, if we're importing shoes from another country and we're competing against Australian products, and the Australian products have increased in price, then my business is actually going to benefit. So if I'm importing tables, or for example, and I'm competing against Australian tables, I would benefit because the Australian tables are now more expensive, so people will want my products. So businesses that import goods and services and resell them at a profit are the ones that are going to benefit here. Other problems for businesses: it can lead to reduced business confidence. So it's important to note that during periods of high inflation, firms are a lot less likely to invest. And the reason they're a lot less likely to invest is because they're often uncertain about their future sales potential. When we have high inflation, it can often reduce the demand for our products. So when inflation's high, people don't want to buy Australian products. Now, firms are not going to invest unless they feel that they're going to be able to generate significant sales. So when there is high levels of inflation, firms are pessimistic about their future sale potential, and they're less likely to invest. So that's the first reason they're less likely to invest, is they're scared about not having sales in the future. The second reason they're less likely to invest is because generally when we have high inflation, the government or the RBA will increase interest rates to try and slow inflation down. Now, if I'm running a firm, I do not want to be in debt when interest rates increase, because I'm going to have to pay more money off my debt, and therefore I'm going to have less money left to, well, basically I'm going to have to pay more money off my debt, and therefore it's less of an incentive for me to borrow. So there's two reasons investment spending falls. One, firms are less confident about their future sales, and two, they don't want to be stuck with high interest rates if they have debt. The reason interest rates increase is because firms often need to protect their real rate of return. Now, what I mean by that is if I'm lending somebody money at, let's say, 5% interest, but inflation was at 6%, then I'm essentially going to be losing money lending to people, because when I get that money back, it's not going to be worth as much. So its real value will have dropped by 6%. So I need to keep my interest rates above that 5% figure, otherwise I'm going to lose money on that. So another problem for businesses is it reduces investment spending. The first problem, exporters suffer and import competing businesses. Second problem, there's less investment spending. Third problem is it often leads to businesses having to increase their wages, or what we call a wage price spiral. Now, what a wage price spiral is: let's say we have high inflation. Well, if there's high inflation, workers are going to demand a higher real wage. They're going to demand a higher nominal wage, or a higher actual wage, otherwise their purchasing power will fall. So if inflation increases, workers demand a higher nominal wage to protect their real wage. And because workers are demanding a higher nominal wage, that's increasing businesses' cost of production. So businesses' costs of production increase, and therefore they have to increase their prices again to maintain their profit margins. So they increase their prices, and again that leads to more inflation. And when prices go up again, workers demand higher real wages again, or higher nominal wages, sorry. And then when they increase their nominal wages, that leads to higher prices again, or higher production costs and higher prices. So it keeps going round in circles. Inflation occurs, workers demand higher wages, that leads to higher production costs, and then firms have to raise their prices again, and then workers demand higher wages, and so on and so forth. That's why it's called a spiral. There are some companies that do well from inflation. Firms that invest in shares and property often benefit from inflation, because the price of property often goes up by more than the rate of inflation, and therefore some businesses will actually benefit, but most businesses suffer. Inflation and the government. How does it affect the government? Benefits for the government. The benefits from the government is because of bracket creep. So people get pushed into higher tax brackets. The government collects more tax from these people. And they're also likely to collect more GST, because if the prices of everything is increasing and the government's collecting 10% of the price of things, essentially they're going to be collecting more GST because they're collecting 10% of a higher price. So the government benefit from bracket creep and increased GST, but they also suffer because inflation generally leads to increased unemployment. People lose their jobs because our exports are less competitive, and that leads to higher unemployment and less tax revenue for the government, and they also have to pay more welfare to the unemployed. So that can lead to bigger budget deficits. So for the government, there are benefits in that they get more tax off people for bracket creep and GST, but the costs are it can lead to more unemployment and therefore more welfare for the government and less tax. Okay? I'm not going to go through bracket creep again, but basically people get pushed into this tax bracket and therefore the government collect 37 cents instead of 32.5 cents. But so they get higher indirect taxes, more GST and more bracket creep, but there's more unemployment.